This is World of Info, and we're coming from Studio 3. My name is Dr. Amr MABROuk. Dua Muhammad is at the control. And yes, this is Radio Cairo. And today we are in the world of books. And today I'm presenting two very Egyptian books. Really books that are very stimulating, very nostalgic, and at the same time giving us a real great idea about the history of Egypt. And these two books, which deserve definitely to be read, are number one, or the first book is The Jews of Zahir, Masouda, Alisha, and Marzouk by Suhair Abdul Hamid. And the second book, The Mausoleums of the Islamic Rulers of Egypt in City of Cairo by Dr. Mahmoud Sayyid Abdullah. Well, these are two challenging books to read because, first of all, the first book of Suhair Abdul Hamid is a bit misleading because it gives such a sort of like a trend, as if it is just talking about the Jews of Zahir, while this lady has done a great work or a great research work in the field of Zahir, which is one of the important places or parts of Cairo, and definitely in the heart of Cairo, and has really a big population of Cairo is living in this area. And it deserved definitely a book about it. And the work of Suhair Abdul Hamid, nobody can deny the efficiency, the effectability, and the concentration that she did with this mammoth work. The second book, The Mausoleums of the Islamic Rulers of Egypt, is a PhD thesis that has been so sharp and so full of details that the author of this work, or the researcher of this work, has decided to publish it and to write it in a book, and definitely a book that deserves to be read. So let's start right away with the first book by Suhair Abdul Hamid. Well, Suhair Abdul Hamid has decided to take the place of Zahir, which is one of the parts of Cairo, almost lying to the north of Midtown Cairo, and talking about it in full details. And she didn't only tell the stories of the Jews that were living there, the Egyptian Jews, and I insist the Egyptian Jews who were living there, because they were part of our community, and they were Egyptians as much as we are Egyptians. And at the same time, she has given them a full historical review. And she has given us a full historical review of this region of Cairo, telling us about this part of Cairo and its history. Let's first start with what is the Zahir area, or what is the Zahir region. Well, the Zahir area is a part in Cairo that, if you want to understand where it is exactly, if we talk about the main railway station of Cairo, on the right side, if you are going to Heliopolis, you'll find an area before the region of Al-Abbasiyya, and this region is called Al-Zahir. And in Al-Zahir, this you will find a lot of landmarks that will make it very, very special and very, very dynamic, because this area didn't have or didn't start as a part of Cairo, but it was part of the suburbs of Cairo. And in the one who has decided to open or to start the urbanization of this area was he himself, Zahir Babers, and that's why the region was called Zahir. Zahir Babers is a ruler, a Mamluk ruler of Egypt. He is considered really to be the first great grand Mamluk Sultan of Egypt. We know the history of Zahir started when he was one of the Mamluks at the Salih Najmuddin Ayyub Mamluks, and he has done a great heroic job in defeating the Crusaders who invaded Egypt in Mansoura and Dumyat, and he's the one who one of the very important knights in shining armor who was able to take the King Louis IX of France as a prisoner of war, even after the death of Salih Najmuddin Ayyub. And we know the story of how Chagar the Dur, his wife, was a Concavian, kept this as a secret from the troops, and so that they don't lose their morals. And she used Zahir Babers and his fellow colleagues, Saifuddin Qutuz as well, to organize the army and defeat these invaders. However, Zahir Babers has joined forces with Saifuddin Qutuz. Of course, we're going to drop the idea of what happened with Aybak and Shagar al-Dur because we have talked about that previously in a lot of our episodes. Let's talk in particular about Zahir Babers, who he himself, with Saifuddin Qutuz, on the command of the Egyptian army, were able to defeat the Mughals, the Holako troops, at the famous battle and Ain Galut, and the defeat ended the threat of the Mughals to Egypt. On their way back to Egypt, Zahir Babers felt that Saifuddin Qutuz is going to betray him. So he decided to kill him before he gets killed. And of course, this I think was a bit more advanced in the way of thinking of Zahir Babers, because definitely Saifuddin Qutuz was not going to plan to kill him. But anyway, he killed him and he was put on the throne to replace him. And he was the Sultan of Egypt from 1260 till 1277. He was a great man, a great knight, a man who was very famous for being very just as a king of Egypt. Every year he would go to the north, to what's now Syria and Palestine and Lebanon, and was able always to invade one of the castles of the Crusaders and ended up by liberating them. And he was having a very organized sultanate and a real empire that was founded by him. However, the Zahir Babers was very much in love with the games of the horses. And of course, this is like polo and other types of games. And he has had a beautiful court in the north of Cairo, and what is now the real Zahir. And in this game yards, he decided that he's going to build a great mosque of his. And this mosque was built by Zahir Babers, and it was built in the area of these game courts to the north of Cairo. And yes, this was the first urbanization of the Zahir area. The region as a whole was called Zahir, and he was able to start building this beautiful mosque that was very huge. And it was, we call, a congregational mosque, a mosque that can take almost a big part of the population of Cairo to pray the Friday prayers. And this mosque, which was unfortunately not well kept after the death of Zahir Babers, has seen periods of decline. Sometimes even during the French occupation, it was used as barracks for the French forces, and then the British even used it certain times as stores, and then later on even used it for a slaughterhouse for pigs. So the mosque has been in decline for hundreds of years, especially after the Ottoman period and during the French occupation and then the British occupation. However, the mosque has seen better days now with its restoration, and it's getting a bit back to what it used to be during the Zahir time. So in this area, the mosque was responsible for urbanization. And he has asked the Sultan Zahir Babers, his friends and his Mamluks, to start urbanization of this area of Cairo, and they started building in these places. However, then we should go further in the history of the Zahir area or the Zahir suburb by saying that in this particular area, we can see a lot of things about that, because we can really clarify what happened with the urbanization. Let's talk first about the amount of Jews that were there in Egypt, and they were Egyptian Jews. They were been living here for quite a long time in Egypt, and they have always been living in the quarters of the ghetto, the Jewish ghetto in Cairo. But as they get richer, they will start to get more into urbanization. And so some of them, when they have started to gain more money, They would build houses, especially this started from the 19th century onwards. They would build houses in the Zahir, and when they get more richer, they would go either to Garden City or Zamalek. So Suhair Abdul Hamid, the writer, is following the Jews of Zahir, but she is also following other people who were living there. And that's what we're going to talk about after the break. So you're still listening to the World of Info, and we're coming from Studio 3. My name is Dr. Amr MABROuk, and Dua Muhammad is at the control. So the writer Suhair Abdul Hamid didn't just write about the Jews of Zahir, because first of all, she was very analytical. She has got a lot of resources and sources. She went and visited all the traces of the Jews, even compared them with the names of the streets, the places that they were living, had first-hand interviews with the people who were living with the Jews, have studied what's the difference between the Qara'in and the Rabbayin, the different types of Jews in Egypt, and talked very much in favor of them, of their honesty in their work, in their caring of their jobs, and their living in peace with their neighbors. She talked about the books and different books that were published about people who lived in the Zahir area, like, for example, The Man in the White and Shark Skin Suit by Lucette Leonardo, and other books that talked about this particular period. She talked about the different uh, synagogues, and she talked also about the that were there in this area, about the Jewish hospital that was there, and the different places that have seen the progress of their life and their love to Egypt. But also, she was very careful to tell us about other people who were living in Zahir. The Zahir was a mosaic cosmopolitan suburb of Cairo. We have said that we have found the Jews living there. There were different sects of Christians, Egyptian Copts, and the Egyptian Coptic Society has decided that it's going to build a hospital, that is the Coptic hospital, where, in particular, in the Zahir area, that is in front of in front of the famous station of Cairo station, railway station, and how this hospital has this. The people decided, the Coptic Society, Charity Society, decided that it's going to treat Muslims and Christians the same way. And this definitely gives a very good idea about this life. So we talk about that. So this was an example of the charity that was done by Egyptian Copts, Orthodox Copts that were living in the Zahir and in the whole region of Cairo. Also, she has discussed the number of churches, not only the synagogues that were present in Zahir, and even two monasteries. One of them is belonging to the Dominicans, where there is a very famous library that has all the Islamic heritage of Egypt and authentic books over there, and they are giving this, helping these scholars of Islamic theology. And also another monastery that belongs to the Greek Orthodox, representing the monastery as well of Saint Catherine in in the Mount Sinai, of course. And this definitely gives us an idea of the cosmopolitan mosaic of Cairo, of the area of Zahar. He also has she discussed the amount of schools that are present in this area. For example, the Jesuit, the Frere de la Salle, and other and even the Jewish schools that were there, and the different hospitals and the synagogues. So the book is taking us not through just the examination of different Jews who were living there, but also telling us history about the different magazines that were there at that time, the journals like the Kalim and all this stuff, and the amount of nostalgia that the Jews who left Egypt has up till now to Egypt, because they have really spent a great time living in Egypt and enjoyed their stay. However, the comparison, of course, of the number of people who were having the Egyptian nationality in comparison to the people who were not having the Egyptian nationality and were proud to keep the foreign nationality so that they can go to the mixed courts and therefore receive a better treatment in courts. This was another example of how the Jews of Egypt were living in the Zahar. Definitely, when we look at the book with the nostalgia that we can find on it, we can really go into going into very much information about even the Syrians who lived in Egypt. The famous Habib Sakakini, who has built a beautiful palace that's now belongs to the Ministry of Health and acts as a museum for the Ministry of Health. It's a beautiful palace that has been built in the area of Zahar. The amount of people living in Zahar and the amount of urbanization that went on can also lead us to talk about the Armenians who lived in Egypt, who has chosen Egypt to become their place of nation, and how much they belong to there, and even they have decided to make their own cathedral in the area of Zahar. So Zahar is a cosmopolitan suburb of Egypt. Not only was it a ghetto for the Jews, but it was Muslims, Christians, Armenians, and all types of Christians, churches, synagogues, mosques, and different types of hospitals of different regions. All of this were in one only suburb of Cairo, that is Zahir. So when we call the Zahir or the Zahir Babers, who has built this beautiful mosque that now has been renovated lately, can definitely show us how by building only one mosque in a beautiful game or courtyard, things can get into urbanization and a mosaic can form, and a lot of people would live and fit in and stay forever for generations. A beautiful book by Suhair Abdul Hamid that I really definitely advise that you should read and understand and go through its pages, examining and looking on the beautiful photographs that she has added to this book. Definitely a book that deserves to be read. Stay tuned to us in Radio. So, still listening to Radio Cairo, and this is the world of info. And my name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad is still at the control. And our second book of the day is definitely a very interesting book. This is the book that I really found pleasure in reading. Although it's a bit scientific and it's a research thesis of the author of this book, who has done a great effort in writing the book and going around the different references and going around different areas, and it's a groundwork because it is about the mausoleums of and the resting place of the Egyptian rulers of Islamic Egypt, and he is taking us in Cairo city and trying to tell us where to find where the rulers of Egypt are buried in Islamic period. The Islamic period started with the year 640 when Amr ibn al-As came to Egypt and founded the city of Fustat and became the designated governor by Umar ibn al-Khattab. And this was the start of the Islamic rule and the Islamic proliferation in Egypt. When we talk about this, definitely we'll see how far this book definitely goes through us. When we look at how he has gone through pages of extensive work, so he starts his work by going through the start of the arrival of the Muslims to Egypt, Amr ibn al-As, and the start of building mausoleums and places for burials. And of course, we know when the Arabs came, the burials were very simple, and the idea of not building big mausoleums on top of the uh, the burial place of the rulers or important people, because the Muslims in the beginning were afraid that they can be put into likely like a saint or could be worshipped and all this stuff. But by time as Islam went on stronger and the face became more involved in the lives and the times of the people. Well, these people started to take care a bit of the barrier places. And we find that Amr ibn al-As, who was put to rule Egypt twice, once during the Umar regime and later on during Muawiyah's regime, and he died in Egypt, that the place of burial of Amr ibn al-As in particular is in Muqattam Hill. And why in Muqattam Hill? Because Amr ibn al-As, when he arrived to Egypt, has heard from a lot of the Egyptians that Muqattam has an area, a lot of saints have been living there, and this is a place of a lot of blessings, and therefore he decided to be buried as well there. So the idea of being buried in these areas, the author takes us step by step, trying to trace where the every ruler or governor of Egypt was buried. And we find in the beginning, during the Fustat time, that the numbers of rulers were buried, or the governors of Egypt were buried in simple burials, whether this was in the Muqattam Hills or in the regions outside Fustat. But as time progressed, and as there was the Abbasid regimes, and after the Abbasids, there was for a short period of time, there was Ibn Tulun family and dynasty, and short-lived dynasty, other short-lived dynasty, that's Rashid. The Tulunids, or the Ibn Tulun himself, has built very huge quarters in Egypt, and they could not really very much trace the city Al Qata'a where most probably Ibn Tulun was buried. So after that, the Ikhshids at the same time, we couldn't trace very much where their burials is. But when the Fatimids came to rule Egypt, the Mu'izz al-Din Allah brought the bodies of his grandparents and his father and his great grandparent, and he decided to bury them in Cairo, in the city city victorious that he has built as the capital of his newly founded empire. And this was beside his palace. We had the Eastern Palace and the Western Palace, and he decided in the Eastern Palace that he's going to have a cemetery for for his ancestors. And in this particular area, there were the Fatimids were buried. All the Caliphs of the Fatimid period were buried in this region, except for the Hakim Amrullah, who he was not able to. They were not able to find his corpse after his death. So all the Fatimid rulers and the Fatimid family were dynasty were buried in this region near the Eastern Palace. However, after the come of Salah ad-Din and being these people Shiite, some haters of the Fatimid dynasty decided to dig all these cemetery and distributed the bones and buried them elsewhere. And this was a very strange thing to happen. And they were buried on the eastern outskirts of Cairo, near the Muqattam Hill, where originally this is where almost a lot of Egyptians chosen to be the resting place, because this is on the eastern part of Cairo, and what's now known in the area of Salah Salim Street and the burial sites near to it. So this is the ideas of the Fatimids. But when the Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi came, we know that Salah ad-Din died in Damascus, and so did Al-Adil, his brother, who was also having a co-regency of Egypt. But later on, the king Al-Kamil also died in Damascus and was buried there. But Salih Najm ad-Din Ayyub, the one who has defended, and we have just talked about his role in defending Egypt against the Crusaders and his death, his wife buried him in a beautiful mausoleum that is in Mu'izz al-Din Allah Street. And this is one of the very famous mausoleums that were built in this region and the start of burials for the governors of Egypt in this area. We see Salah Najm ad-Din Ayyub mausoleum built, and later on this dome has been the site of the four sects of judges that was later on in the Salih al-Din area. However, Shajar al-Dur, who was responsible for building this dome, has built herself another mausoleum, and she decided to build this mausoleum of hers near the Sayyida Nafisa mosque because she thought that the Egyptians believed very much in Sayyida Nafisa, so they were frequently visiting, almost always Sayyida Nafisa, so they will pass by her mausoleum whenever they're going to Sayyida Nafisa. And I've seen this beautiful mausoleum, and we know it's very beautiful, very has a lot of feminine touch, if we use the expression. We know that Shagar al-Dur was killed by her the ex-wife of her husband, Muazdin Aybak, after she killed him, and her body was thrown out of the citadel where was kept for some time, and then a bystander passed by and he decided to give her a decent burial, and she was buried in her beautiful mausoleum just on the back door of Sayyida Nafisa. Izzeddin Aybak mausoleum is found somewhere, but they couldn't really be easily traced. And as we know that Zahir Babers was buried in Syria, in Damascus, and then came Qalawun. The Qalawun, the founder of, considered to be the founder of the Bahari dynasty, actually has decided to build himself a beautiful complex that has a hospital, a school, a khanqa for the Sufis, and the hospital is still working up till now, and a beautiful dome that is exactly in front of the dome of Salah al-Din Ayyub. And there is a school and there is Sabil as well. However, the mosque was so beautiful, the dome was so beautiful, and after the death of Qalawun, his son, even Nasr Muhammad, although he built himself a mosque and a mausoleum beside his father's mosque, yet he decided to be buried beside his father in the same dome. And there were a lot of the sons of Sultan Nasr Muhammad were buried as well with their great grandfather and their father in the same area. So we'll see how the people were starting to bury their leaders in these mosques and in building them special places. And then it became a habit during the Mamluks' time that every Mamluk will try to build himself a mosque and a mausoleum. And a mausoleum, the mosque will contain a school and a sabil. This was common for the kings and the sultans of the Mamluks, and at the same time, of course, was less common, but was also apparent in their aides or aide-de-camp, who were very rich as well, and therefore could afford to build themselves mosques and beautiful designs. When we look through the Bahari Mamluks or the Borgi Mamluks, we'll always find the great effort that was done by the author of this book. He has visited all the mosques and the places of burials, and he described in full details, and he has mentioned whether this is a proved place of burial, for example, like Khalil ibn Qalawun, the son of Nasir Muhammad, the son of Qalawun, who was before Ashraf, before Nasir Muhammad, and he was his brother, and he was killed, and then he was buried in his burial place and his mosque, small school and mausoleum just behind the Sayyida Nafisa. He has described other places of burials. He has described the works of the Ayyubids as well in building the dome of Shafi, and he has designated a small chapter about the Abbasid Caliphs that were brought by the Mamluks to give them the legitimacy, and how these Abbasid Caliphs were buried in a special place in Cairo that is near the Imam Shafi as well, and how and near that's near Sayyida Nafisa in particular, and how the different mosques are built, and how the different places, mosques, sometimes the burial place were used by the Sultan, and his children, when they became sultans, were buried as well with them. He talked about the urbanization of the desert, where there were different types of sultans who built in the Mamluks desert on the northern cemetery, what's now is known as the northern cemetery, like Barkuk, Farag ibn Barkuk, and Brisbai, and Sultan Inal, and of course Consor Said, where we have his still dome, but he was buried elsewhere because he was killed in Alexandria and was buried there. So sometimes people would build themselves domes, and when they die, they are not there, or their bodies are never retrieved, and so they were not buried. So the author went on trying to find places of burial of these sultans. He took us to different places of Cairo, and even took us to a dome that is in a restricted area that we know nobody can visit, and he visited, and that is the dome of Al Adil Tumanbai, or Tumanbai the First, who died in 50 year 1500. So, uh, taking us from the Mamluk period to the Ottoman period, he gives us the work of Khair Bey, the traitor who betrayed Qunsuwa al-Ghuri, and how he found a resting place in this dome, beautiful dome that he has built, and beautiful mosque that he built, but he had the curses of the Egyptians that is going on up till now. He also talked to us about Qunsuwa al-Ghuri, beautiful burial dome, while Qunsuwa al-Ghuri himself was never found because he died in the from the stroke that he had when he saw the defeat of his army in Margadabat, and how that Tumanbai II was buried in the dome of uh, Qunsuwa al-Ghuri, his uncle. He took us to different places where some of the pashas and the governors of Egypt, of the Ottoman Egypt, who died in service here, and they were buried near Imam al-Shafi'i mausoleum. And he took us to the Muhammad Ali dynasty. He went describing in full details the the famous mausoleum of Muhammad Ali, and how it was built and put in construction by his heir Abbas the First. And he took us also to the famous mausoleum of Muhammad Ali dynasty in near Imam al-Shafi'i, where Ibrahim Basha and Abbas the First were put to rest, and how Said died in Alexandria and was buried near Nabi Daniel Mosque, and how the mother of Ismail Basha decided to build the beautiful mosque of Al-Rifai and to make it a burial place for her grandchildren who were buried there. And of course, we can see over there definitely a lot of rulers of Egypt who were buried there, and how Tawfiq has decided to build him. Abbas Halmi II and his the wife of Tawfiq, they decided that they will build a separate mausoleum for Tawfiq in near Manshiet Nasser, and there is where there is buried is Tawfiq, Abbas Halmi II, and all this, and even Muhammad Ali Tawfiq the Prince are also buried in this area. So he did a marvelous job. He has taken us by hand to see every minute detail of the burial places of the rulers of Egypt during the Islamic period afterwards. And he has just also concluded what should we do with all this wealth of information, how this wealth of information can be used for touristic activities, how tours can be made of these places, like a tour of a visit to the Bahari Mamluks burial place, or the mausoleums of the Burgi Mamluks, or giving more details and information for people who are really could be very interested in examining the historical background of Egypt. A book that deserves to be read. And I believe that going through it and reading it definitely has made a great impact on me, and finding places and hearing stories that you could have never thought that they were really existing in Egypt. So I think definitely a book that deserves to be read. Stay tuned, it will come to you after the break. So yes, this is Dr. Amr MABROuk and Dua Muhammad is still at the control. We are coming from Studio 3. This is the World of Info. And today we have presented two interesting books that deserves to be read. Yahud al-Zahir, uh, Masouda Uleisha Marzouk, or The Jews of al-Zahir by Suhair Abdulhamid, a book that not only talks about, with great wealth of information and great background, about the Egyptian Jews who were living in Zahir in their trip from the ghetto in old Cairo to, and after they increased their amount of money, they would go to Garden City or to Zamalek, and their even in their lives after that in diaspora, they always kept in their hearts their lives and their times in Zahir area, suburb of Cairo. And the book definitely talked also about Zahir, the origin of Zahir as a suburb, the mosque, the Christians that were living there, the Armenians living there, the synagogues, the monasteries, the churches, the cathedrals, the schools, really a cosmopolitan part of Cairo. And the second book was The Tombs of Islamic Egypt Rulers in Cairo, an archaeological and a tourist study by Mahmoud Sayyid Abdullah, a book that deserves to be read. It's full of details, full of beautiful plates and colored pictures, and even diagrams of mausoleums, of schools, and everything. A book that definitely deserves to be read. So today, by this, we come to the end of our program. We promise that we'll come back same time, same station in Radio Cairo. Stay tuned always to Radio Cairo, and hopefully we'll see you same time, same station. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK, and Dua Muhammad was at the control. Stay tuned.